This is the story of a chemical that the FDA's own scientists rejected, that a federal grand jury investigated, and that a single political appointee overruled. And it's been in your Diet Coke ever since. The chemical is called aspartame, and for 4 decades running, roughly 63% of the American population has consumed it, in everything from diet soda to yogurt. It's in your chewing gum and even in your chewable vitamins. July of 2023 brought a headline that shook the industry. The World Health Organization classified aspartame as a possible carcinogen. Within hours, the FDA fired back and disagreed publicly. One of those agencies is wrong, and the answer matters to everyone who reaches for a diet soda every afternoon. A senior FDA toxicologist once told Congress that this substance violated federal cancer law. And yet aspartame sits today in approximately 6,000 consumer products sold across more than 100 countries. That's what we're going to walk through in this video, not the conspiracy version and not the industry version, just the documented record. Back in December of 1965, a chemist named James Schlatter sat in a lab at G.D. Searle & Company in Skokie, Illinois, working on something that had nothing to do with sweeteners. Schlatter's project involved developing an anti-ulcer drug, and the compound he synthesized that day combined 2 amino acids, phenylalanine and aspartic acid, into what chemists call a methyl ester. At some point during the process, he licked his finger to pick up a piece of paper and tasted something intensely, unmistakably sweet, roughly 200 times sweeter than sugar. That compound became aspartame, and it would go on to become one of the most bitterly contested food additives in American history. Searle submitted its FDA application in February of 1973, backed by more than 100 safety studies, and the agency granted approval in July of 1974 for limited use in dry foods. That approval survived roughly 5 months. A consumer attorney named James Turner teamed up with neuroscientist John Olney to file formal objections, and Olney carried weight because he had warned Searle as early as 1971 that his research showed aspartic acid eating holes in the brains of infant mice. One of Searle's own researchers had reportedly confirmed those same findings. What followed changed everything. The FDA froze the approval and opened an investigation into how Searle ran its laboratories. What investigators found did not inspire confidence. The FDA commissioner at the time characterized Searle's work with a phrase pulled directly from testimony, calling the studies, quote, at best sloppy, suffering from a pattern of conduct which compromises the scientific integrity of the studies. And that's when something happened that had never occurred before in FDA history. In January of 1977, the agency's chief counsel formally requested that the U.S. Attorney's Office open grand jury proceedings against Searle on the charge of knowingly misrepresenting findings and concealing material facts. No food additive manufacturer had ever faced a criminal referral from the FDA before that moment. And this is where it starts to read like a political thriller. Samuel Skinner, the U.S. attorney assigned to prosecute the case, entered into job negotiations with Sidley and Austin, the same law firm defending Searle, while the investigation remained open. Skinner recused himself from the case in February of 1977 and eventually took the position at the firm. His replacement, an interim U.S. attorney named William Conlon, that never convened with the grand jury, and the statute of limitations ran out before any charges materialized. Conlon later joined Sidley and Austin as well. Meanwhile, Searle brought in a new CEO in March of 1977 to turn the company around, a man named Donald Rumsfeld, who had already served as a congressman, as White House Chief of Staff, and as Secretary of Defense under Gerald Ford. September of 1980 brought a formal reckoning, when the FDA assembled a public board of inquiry consisting of 3 independent scientists to evaluate whether aspartame belonged in the food supply. Their recommendation left no room for ambiguity. Do not approve. The board concluded that Searle had not demonstrated reasonable certainty of safety and called for more research into a possible connection to brain tumors. Ronald Reagan won the presidency 2 months later, and Rumsfeld joined his transition team. According to a 1987 UPI investigation, Rumsfeld stood before a Searle sales meeting in January of 1981 and told the room he planned to, quote, call in his markers, end quote, to push aspartame through that year. Reagan's administration installed Dr. Arthur Hull Hayes Jr. as the new FDA commissioner, and that's when the tide turned for good. On May 19th of 1981, 3 of the 6 in-house FDA scientists responsible for reviewing Searle's brain tumor data formally recommended against approval. On July 15th of 1981, Hayes overruled both his own scientists and the independent board, approving aspartame for dry goods as his very first major action in office. Carbonated beverages came next in 1983, and that approval went through despite opposition from the National Soft Drink Association itself, which had urged the FDA to hold off because aspartame broke down too quickly in liquid. Hayes departed the agency in November of 1983, under a cloud of questions about unauthorized flights on a General Foods corporate airplane, and General Foods ranked among the largest NutraSweet customers in the country. His next employer turned out to be Burson Marsteller, the public relations firm that represented Searle. 2 years after that, Monsanto purchased GD Searle for $2.7 billion, spun off the NutraSweet company as a separate subsidiary, and aspartame became a billion-dollar product overnight. Now let's get into the chemistry, because this is the part the industry describes accurately and also the part they tend to leave half-finished. When you drink a can of diet soda, none of the aspartame reaches your bloodstream in its original form. Your small intestine breaks it apart into 3 components. Phenylalanine accounts for about 50% by weight, and it's an amino acid your body already uses. Aspartic acid makes up roughly 40%, another amino acid present in many common foods, while methanol comprises the remaining 10%, and your body converts that into formaldehyde, then formic acid, and finally into carbon dioxide and water. Now the industry's standard rebuttal is they point out that all 3 of these metabolites show up in ordinary foods. They say that a single banana generates more methanol than a can of Diet Coke, while a glass of tomato juice delivers 4 to 6 times that amount. None of that is wrong. But here's the thing. The question that keeps pulling researchers back to the lab has nothing to do with whether these metabolites exist elsewhere in your diet. The real question is whether years of daily repeated aspartame exposure at normal consumption levels triggers effects that the original safety studies from the 1970s never caught. And the more recent research gives a complicated answer. Let's start with weight loss, which is the entire reason most people drink diet soda in the first place. Randomized controlled trials have not found that aspartame directly causes weight gain. That's worth knowing. What muddied the picture came from the Cardi observational cohort, which tracked participants for 17 years, and found that long-term diet soda consumers carried 8 to 15% more visceral belly fat. On top of that, the WHO recommended in 2023 against using artificial sweeteners for weight control, saying the data showed no long-term benefit in reducing body fat. Gut Health tells a similar half-clear story. The 2022 study published in Cell by Suez and his colleagues tested 4 different sweeteners on 120 adults. Every single one altered the gut microbiome. Aspartame specifically showed neutral effects on glucose tolerance as a group. But the composition of stool and oral bacteria shifted measurably. Headaches produced more direct findings. A double-blind crossover study in neurology found that participants consuming aspartame reported headaches on 33% of days, compared with 24% in the placebo. A separate trial showed that healthy adults on a high aspartame diet for just 8 days exhibited more irritable moods and diminished spatial orientation. Blood sugar and insulin appeared mostly unaffected. A 2025 systematic review in Advances in Nutrition compiled 100 experiments and concluded that aspartame exerts, quote, little to no effects on glucose metabolism. But that same year, a mouse study in cell metabolism discovered that aspartame promoted arterial plaque growth through an insulin-triggered inflammatory pathway. Researchers cautioned that human relevance remained unproven. Taken together, the pattern looks like this. The effects register as real, but modest. The studies frequently contradict one another, and almost no one has examined what happens after 20 or 30 years of daily consumption. Cancer is the part that dominated headlines in 2023, and it remains the most widely misread piece of this entire story. Beginning in 2005, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy released 3 separate studies in which rats consumed aspartame across their full lifetimes. The results showed dose-related increases in lymphomas, leukemias, and other cancers. Both the FDA and EFSA rejected those findings. They argued the Ramazzini team deviated from standard laboratory practices, that the lifetime feeding design inflated tumor counts, and that many of the rats showed signs of chronic infections unrelated to aspartame. And that's when 2 announcements landed on the same day in July of 2023. IARC, which stands for the International Agency for Research on Cancer, who operate as the WHO's cancer research arm, classified aspartame as Group 2B, meaning possibly carcinogenic to humans. At the exact same time, JECFA, the joint FAO and WHO Expert Committee on Food Additives, reaffirmed that consuming aspartame at current levels remains safe. They left the acceptable daily intake pinned at 40 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Those 2 conclusions seem to collide head-on, but they actually answer entirely different questions. The IARC performs what scientists call hazard identification. They ask whether a substance can cause cancer under any set of circumstances. Their answer came back as possibly, grounded in limited evidence for liver cancer, across 3 human studies, limited evidence from animal research, and consistent signs of oxidative stress. JECFA tackles a different job called risk assessment. They ask what the probability of harm looks like at the doses people actually swallow. Their conclusion held that no convincing evidence of danger existed at normal intake, and that exceeding the safety threshold would require you drinking more than 9 cans of diet soda every single day. The FDA pushed back within hours. Their official statement from July 14th of 2023 put it bluntly, saying that aspartame being labeled by IARC as possibly carcinogenic to humans does not mean that aspartame is actually linked to cancer. Dr. William Dahoud, Chief Scientific Officer at the American Cancer Society, struck a more careful tone. He said the bottom line is that there is not current evidence that definitively leads ingestion of aspartame to cancer, but since there is a possible link, it is certainly reasonable to limit one's intake until more definitive studies are available. While Dr. Francesco Branca, the WHO's own director of nutrition, delivered what may have been the most unvarnished take of the day. His words were, "We're not advising companies to withdraw products, nor are we advising consumers to stop consuming altogether. We're just advising for a bit of moderation." For some perspective on what Group 2B actually means, consider that it contains approximately 323 agents. The list includes aloe vera, pickled vegetables, gasoline, cell phone radiation, and titanium dioxide. The classification sits at the third highest level out of 4, which translates to evidence that is limited but not something you can wave away. Research published since then delivered one notable update. In 2025, the Nurses' Health Study, one of the largest and longest-running health investigations on the planet, examined over 10,800 breast cancer cases, tracked across nearly 30 years. They found zero association between aspartame consumption and breast cancer risk. That does not prove aspartame is safe across every type of cancer, but it stands as the biggest new data set to arrive since the 2023 classification, and it found nothing. 5 decades of unresolved debate don't happen by accident. The explanation involves more than just conflicting lab results. Follow the money, and the picture sharpens. Researchers Mandrioli, Kearns, and Biro published a systematic review in PLOS I in 2016 after analyzing 31 review papers on aspartame safety. Their numbers painted a stark contrast. Reviews backed by industry funding proved 17 times more likely to reach favorable conclusions about aspartame. Reviews written by authors carrying financial conflicts of interest landed on a safe verdict 7 times more often, and 42% of those reviews failed to disclose the author's financial ties at all. A separate analysis pushed the picture even further, finding that roughly 90% of all studies concluding aspartame pose no danger received some sort of industry funding. None of that automatically invalidates those studies. Industry-funded research applies the same scientific methods as any other. But when the ratio between favorable and unfavorable outcomes hits 17-1, ignoring that pattern stops being an option. The FDA maintains that aspartame ranks among, quote, the most exhaustively studied substances in the human food supply, end quote. With more than 100 studies on record, that label holds up on the surface. But here's what Dr. William Dahoud, the American Cancer Society's chief scientist, told reporters in 2023. He said, "I think there's actually been very little long-term research, surprisingly. Exhaustively studied, but never for long enough. That gap sits at the center of every unresolved question about aspartame." Regardless of where the science eventually lands, the marketplace has already picked a direction and started walking. Sam's Club announced in June of 2025 that aspartame would be stripped from all of its members' Mark store brand products. Walmart followed 4 months later with plans to pull aspartame from roughly 1,000 great value and market-side items by January of 2027. PepsiCo tried a version of this move back in 2015, yanking aspartame from Diet Pepsi and swapping in sucralose. Sales cratered by nearly 6% that year, and nosedived another 11% the following quarter, which forced the company to reverse course and restore aspartame, just 3 years after making the switch. But the larger current running underneath those numbers looks unmistakable. Zero-sugar sodas now drive 52% of soda category sales growth. The word diet itself has become what one industry analyst described as radioactive among younger consumers. PepsiCo spent $1.95 billion to acquire the prebiotic soda brand Poppi in March of 2025. Coca-Cola had already launched its own functional soda, Simply Pop, a month earlier. Across the globe, 48% of consumers now express a preference for natural sweeteners over artificial ones. Stevia stands as the fastest-growing segment, with usage climbing 22% in major European markets during 2023. Monk fruit projections show the market more than doubling to $1.2 billion by 2033. And Alu, a rare sugar that the FDA says does not need to appear as an added sugar on labels, is steadily emerging as the industry's newest favorite ingredient. Diet Coke, for its part, has never once removed aspartame. As of this recording, it remains the primary sweetener in both Coca-Cola's and PepsiCo's flagship diet and zero-sugar product lines. If you're watching this, and you drink 1 or 2 diet sodas a day, the current science does not conclude that you have cancer or that you're destined to develop it. Under the FDA's acceptable daily intake of 50 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, a person weighing 150 pounds could theoretically consume 15 to 17 cans a day across an entire lifetime without crossing the safety threshold. Average consumption among aspartame users sits around 4.9 milligrams per kilogram, which lands below 10% of that ceiling. But here's what the record also tells us. That safety threshold traces back to studies conducted in the 1970s and early 1980s. The same studies that the FDA's own investigators found riddled with irregularities. A political appointee forced through the approval over the objections of an independent scientific review board and 3 of the 6 agency scientists assigned to the case. Every long-term human study available today relies on observational data, which cannot establish cause and effect by design. And the most forthright assessment to emerge from any major health body in 2023 came from Dr. Francesco Branca, the WHO's Director of Nutrition and Food Safety. On July 14th, he said that while safety is not a major concern at the doses which are commonly used, potential effects have been described that need to be investigated by more and better studies. Sit with those words for a moment. The WHO's top nutrition official acknowledged that effects have been described but never adequately investigated. He said this about a product that has been on the market for 60 years, backed by more than 100 studies and sold in over 100 countries. After all of that, a clean answer still does not exist. Here is what the record confirms. Beyond dispute, a substance discovered by accident, investigated for data fraud, turned down by an independent scientific board, and pushed through by a political appointee connected to the manufacturer's transition team, has occupied a place in your diet soda for 42 years running. The World Health Organization tagged it as a possible carcinogen in 2023, the same year the WHO's own Risk Assessment Committee declared it safe at current consumption levels. America's largest retailers are stripping it from their store brands. The fastest-growing beverage companies refuse to use it. The industry as a whole appears to be moving on. No one in an official capacity is going to tell you to throw out your diet soda. Not the FDA, not the WHO, and not the American Cancer Society, but the documented record carries enough weight to make you want to set the can down on your own. Harvard nutritional epidemiologist Walter Willett offered a grounding piece of practical advice in 2023. He said that for people who are presently consuming diet soda, the worst possible decision would be to switch to regular sugar-sweetened soda. That point holds up because sugar carries its own thoroughly documented dangers. But Dr. Branca, the WHO's nutrition director, raised a third path that often gets lost in the debate. He put it this way: if consumers are faced with the decision of whether to drink cola with sweeteners or one with sugar, he thinks there should be a third option considered: water, tea, coffee, sparkling water with a squeeze of lemon. The third option is the one that nobody spends $2.7 billion to advertise. If this video helped you understand what sits inside that can, pass it along to someone who still reaches for one every afternoon. And if you want to see the original research sources behind every claim in this video, the full fact sheet is linked in the description below. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Videos like this take a long time to research and put together, and the fact that you stayed for all of it genuinely means a lot. One of the reasons we make these videos is because most people never hear the full story. They get the headline, they get the industry talking point, and they never see the documented record sitting underneath. Our goal is to change that, one topic at a time. If you found this useful, or if it made you think twice about something you've been told your whole life, consider hitting subscribe. It's free, it takes about a second, and it's the single best way to support what we're doing here. It also makes sure the next one shows up in your feed, so you don't have to go looking for it. There's a full playlist of videos just like this one on your screen right now, the same format, with the same level of research, and all different topics. Pick one and keep going.